As we all know, Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth held their little military hate pep rally this week. And one thing I pointed out immediately after this, in the segments that I've done about it, was the fact that nobody clapped. In fact, it got so bad at one point that Trump himself had to remind the generals, like, you can clap if you want. It was real reminiscent of Jeb Bush and his pathetic little, please clap. Because the generals in that audience were sitting there, stone-faced, dead silent, as Donald Trump rattled off his phony accomplishments that, of course, didn't happen, and talked about using the inner cities for troops to train for war, things that were horrific to these generals in the crowd. So they're not going to clap. They're not going to jump up and start screaming and crying and giving Donald Trump the type of rally response that he is used to. And according to new reports, this hurt Donnie's feelings. Little Donnie is sad. You know, our little whiny bitch president can't handle talking to people that aren't screaming and cheering and throwing their underwear on stage for him because that's what he likes. And these generals weren't cutting it. So you had retired Lieutenant General Mark Hartling, who is also a contributor for MSNBC. He went on Morning Joe, and here is what he had to say about Trump's reaction to the lack of reaction from the crowd. He gave so many things to talk about from that speech, but the, quote, war from within, as you just mentioned, and putting soldiers on American streets to train how to react to different enemies from within were two of the highlights that I wrote down, and it was just a combination of two things that I believe were leading to what we might see next. And the other thing I'd say is President Trump thrives on applause and cheering and interactions with an audience. And when he didn't get that, and instead got quiet professionalism from the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in the audience, that likely rattled him from the very beginning. And that silence wasn't disrespect, it was restraint and discipline and adherence to the oath of office. It was, to me, a collective reminder of our professional culture that we have in the military that transcends politics. It was on full display, and it was interesting to watch from both sides of the audience. In other words, it's kind of like a comedian, you know? If you're the opening act, or if you have a very weak opening act like Trump did with Hegseth, the audience is already not in a good mood. So it's harder for that comedian to come out and get jokes that land when the audience is already annoyed. So the comedian can end up bombing the set, even if that set killed the night before with a totally different audience, but with a different opening act. Trump is used to the good audience. He's used to the people being warmed up, being energized and excited. And he didn't get it. He walked out there, may as well have been looking at statues in the audience because that's how stoic they were. And it immediately threw him off his game. That's why he was lower energy. That's why he kept repeating the same stories that he tells every time he gets in front of a microphone. And that also, by the way, is in fact a symptom of dementia. He tells the same stories because those are the only things he can recall. And the stories do change slightly with each retelling. That's also a key. It's also a symptom. So the whole thing just threw him for a loop. And now that it's over with, now that he's back in the Oval Office or perhaps out on the golf course, how has he reacted? Well, he hasn't talked much about those folks, but he has gone on multiple insane tirades since then because he's mad. Because he doesn't know how to process these feelings of hurt, so it comes out as anger against people who had nothing to do with what happened. He's emotionally immature, he's emotionally unstable, and of course, probably has a nice little side dish of dementia working against him as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. You know, we're inching closer and closer to 1 million subscribers, and we're aiming to hit that goal before the year closes. So if you aren't subscribed to the channel, please do so, and don't forget to like, comment, and share. Thanks for joining us as we head towards this huge milestone.